Hi, everybody. This is Steve Hargadon, and welcome to Nate McClellen's keynote for the 7th Annual Global Education Conference. Nate, thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, no problem, Steve. Hopefully everyone can hear you and hear me.
Yes, I know I sound a little muffled to you, but we have another computer here, and I think I'm okay. I am on a laptop because I had a computer issue, but if I'm getting muffled from others. So I won't say much. Okay, so thanks to our sponsors and supporters. We really appreciate all that they do to make this conference possible. This is your chance to indicate where you're participating from. Look to the left of the map. We're looking for the star icon. Click on it twice, then click on the map. Feel free to put your city, country, temperature, time in the chat. Lucy doesn't want to let the opportunity to buy to say some things about your workmate, so.
Okay. Yeah. Can I jump in now? Is that okay?
You said before we turn the time over to you. Yeah, let's wait for Lucy because I know she wants to say something about you.
Okay. It seems like people are getting some blank slides too, Steve. So that world pick is blank on mine as well.
Yeah, there's definitely something going on. Weird.
Lucy says that she'll talk at the end in her text.
So if you just put your information in the chat. Okay, so Nate, we're going to turn the time over to you, and then she can chime in.
That sounds great. Okay, well, welcome everybody, and thank you for joining this virtual conference. I'll have to admit, this is the first time I've done a lot of public presentations in front of large audiences, and I've never done a virtual conference before. So excited to do this and test it out. My name is Nate McClennen. I'm the Vice President for Education and Innovation here at Teton Science Schools, which you'll see the website there if you ever want to dig deeper. We're out in Jackson, Wyoming in the United States in the northern Rockies. Just about to enter winter here. Our first snowstorm of the year is coming up, hopefully Thursday. We look forward to these types of things. My role here has been part of the Teton Science Schools is a 501c3, and we run 2 schools and a graduate program and science education courses. Most of my life here has been spent starting and then running one of the schools as principal of the school. In the last year, I've stepped out to try to figure out how place-based education fits into the world of education. And so this talk's going to be about that concept. So thank you all for joining. And I'd start with this idea that we have a challenge. And I suspect because all of you are part of this particular global education conference, you are thinking about this as well, as this idea of as educators, we have the power to shape the next generation. And so I want to frame the challenge as we see it from a variety of different perspectives. So I'm going to walk through 5 different things to ponder, and then I will talk a little bit about how we define this concept of place-based education, and then I'll finish off with some ideas of how you can think about approaching it and implementing it in your own setting or school site setting. So let's start with the first one, this idea that learners need a different model, and thanks to the people at High Tech High in San Diego, one of the principals there created this or found this and shared it. This idea that we're moving from a traditional model, a factory-based model that most of you are aware of, into this innovation model. And I love the idea of thinking about collecting dots rather than connecting dots. And of course, the last 150 years, at least in the United States and then in various time frames around the world, it's been a lot about giving information to students, opening up their brains, dumping it in, and having them regurgitate. And now we're in a place where we are moving this idea into more of a connecting dot. So really thinking about how do we get students to be active thinkers, to create, to make, to produce, to collaborate, and really innovate and create new ideas from the existing knowledge bases that's out there. So we're in this idea of a creative economy and moving out of this idea of a knowledge economy. And so that's the first challenge we're facing, is that we need a different model for education. And this is a really hard thing to do with the paradigms that just about everyone is stuck within in the modern worlds of education. The second problem is this idea of civic engagement, and this is a slide that came out of, there's a couple different sources here, but out of the Pew Research Center and a couple other, the Gallup poll, et cetera. And they look at a couple different things. And this is a 2015 Civic Engagement Index. And this idea that 44% helped a stranger. And these are global statistics. They've surveyed many, many countries. 27% donated money, 20% volunteered. And of those three, of course, that depends on socioeconomics in the world and the country within which you live. But what's especially sort of resonates with me is this idea that, okay, there's 20% of people that have volunteered their time. 44%, so less than half will help a stranger. And so what does that tell us about our civic engagement, our community engagement? And then, of course, voting, which is especially poignant here in the United States after we just finished an election, is that in the U.S. we're hovering around between 50 and 60% participation in voting. We don't have mandatory voting here, and some countries, of course, do. But when you look at 38 to 87% who are actively using their voice, the one place we can participate at the national level, that's a pretty wide margin, and it really tells us something about the level of civic engagement. So that's the second thing that's happening. So we have a new learner model, a civic engagement issue. Third thing is one of the things we're noticing in the United States, and it's been replicated and seen in a couple big surveys across the world, is that students are going outside less. And some of the data is fairly staggering. In the USA, 65% of kids aren't going outdoors. They're going outdoors less than 1 hour a day. 80% of parents in a survey of 12 different countries, 12,000 parents, said that kids refused to play or didn't know how to play without some form of technology. And there's some authors and some researchers that are starting to say this is a challenge, that students are not going outside, not developing the creativity, not developing that free and open play, and not really understanding the ecology of their areas. And this is starting to happen as more and more technology comes in. And this doesn't mean that technology is bad, it just means that it's something that's happening. Young people are not going outside. So the fourth issue is that learning is available everywhere. And I've been using more and more in my talks this idea of a learner ecosystem, is that schools were originally, and many still are, constrained by the bricks and mortar in which they exist. And so you go to school, you learn all the information you have there, you might come home, students might do homework, repeat the process over and over again for primary school, secondary school, and beyond. But the reality is that learning is available more and more places in the ecosystems within which the student lives. And these could be, if there's area universities, it could be access to online, it could be access to healthcare and health information, it could be access to internships, museums, after-school programs, and it even could be access to the local industries that are around, whether it's the crafts expertise. I do some work in Bhutan in some of my travels, and we notice there that there's a lot of sharing of local culture and local heritage, even within the very structured public sector and the public education system. So the fourth one is this idea of learner ecosystems is the challenge that's facing us. And then the fifth one, which is the 50,000-foot view or 100,000-foot view, is really talking about this idea of complex global challenges. And some of you might recognize this schematic from the UN. These are the UN's global goals for sustainable development. And in my utopia version of education, I'd see that every student and every school think about these big picture ideas, because the reality is that our students are entering this world trying to solve and address and deal with issues like no poverty and zero hunger and good health and well-being and quality education. These are really lofty, aspirational goals, but it's certainly that fifth problem that the rest of the other challenges can then go and support. So it's within this context of these 5 different pieces of learners need a different model, We have low levels of civic engagement across the world. Education is becoming more and more it's able to be personalized. Students are spending less and less time outdoors, and then finally we have these global challenges. And so in our world, we start to put these together and start to imagine learning differently. And I think that some of you will resonate that you've done some of these things as I go to describe this concept of place-based education. But imagine learning where the student curriculum is deeply embedded in local to global contexts. And from the first day of school, students are asked to work on real challenges in real communities. And so if you can think about this concept, this idea that in education, you might have the birth to age 5 when they go into formal schooling, and then they have primary school and secondary school up through 12th grade in the US and then beyond. It's this idea that we ask students to wait, and we ask them to wait for an awful long time before we put them into real contexts where they can make a real difference and have true agency. And I think that there's something deeply flawed about that model, is that we don't give students enough practice in doing real things in the real world. And the second piece of that is this idea that communities where the schools exist, communities don't see schools as resources. In the United States, schools are deeply committed to sports and athletics and extracurriculars after school as big parts of community building. But we don't have communities looking to students as resources, as problem solvers, as functioning individuals able to take on challenges. And so when we think about this, we talk about it in the terms of this world of place-based education, which is integrating learning with local communities to increase engagement, outcomes, and impact. And our value add, this value add is around, we see, and in those of you who have done project-based learning and theme-based learning and all these different pieces, you'll see this, is that teachers and students are more engaged. So that's the first value add that we see, and we're trying to measure and collect data around that. The second is around outcomes, is that we think learning increases, and I think the emerging field of neuroscience is supporting the idea that when you base learning on previous knowledge and you base it on context, is that the long-term retention, long-term connections, long-term thought processes are increased. And then the third outcome, or the third piece, or the value add, is this idea of impact, is that if early on in a student's learning experience we can teach them that they can make a difference and give them the tools to do that, the future generation will be well prepared to tackle some of those global challenges. And I would also argue that place-based education, this is not a new concept that we came up with. It's been around for thousands and thousands of years. Place-based, the original, the origins of learning and education were fundamentally based on your location or based on place. And I would also argue, as I've watched my own 2 children grow up, is that babies, when they're born, are also rooted in place. They're learning about their world, they're asking questions, they're trying to solve challenges. We just stop it when they enter formal schooling. So we look at place through multiple lenses. It's really important to define what we mean by place or community. And so for those of you well-versed in the sustainability world, this is the sustainability triangles, that place or communities have 3 distinct components. One is economies, the other is ecology, and the other is the cultural or social political aspects of place. And all of these are intertwined into defining what place is. So in our organization, with our schools and our graduate program, we clearly define communities and investigate communities based on these 3 areas. And the point is that if you become someone who's focused on the ecology field, you need to understand the economy field and the cultural fields as well, or the socio-political, and vice as you look at all the different sides of the triangle. So multiple lenses is really important for us. The second piece is, just elaborating on this, is that in the sort of professional world, there's some great work being done by the UN, and it's now called CityScan, but the UN Global Compact Cities, and they're really trying to measure all these different facets of place and communities. And I envision this idea of how can we focus our learning in our core curriculum in our schools, thinking about how do we integrate with all these different pieces, and not just for ancillary projects, and not just for after school, and not just for internships or summer or whatever happens, but really deeply embed this idea of understanding communities from multiple facets. And the other, the piece of scale is really important here, is that when I argued that we really want to have students make a difference from day one in their schooling, we have to understand that, and we've reconciled this idea that at first it's really about understanding self. And when you think about early childhood education, or kinders or first in the United States, they're really trying to figure out who they are, how they get along with others, and how they interact within their school and classroom. And these are great proving grounds for understanding community and doing projects. Last year, one of the students at our school, they did a whole project on the playground because they weren't satisfied with the playground, so they went and watched and they filmed, and then they actually designed new setup. In this case, it was different setups on the concrete floor. They added more Foursquare courses, or whatever the case may be. So a way of students to understand what's going on and then to solve the challenges that exist. And of course, as they get older and more experienced, can move to community, to the watershed or region, to the nation or the globe. And all these combine together into really having this scaled approach to understanding place. We believe that once students have this perspective, no matter where they go in the world, they'll have these tools to understand their local communities and make a difference. So we have a framework that we use, and it's combined. It's two different parts. One is this inquiry component, and one is a design component. And so in to break this down a little bit is that our history as an organization is based on science and looking at the world through a scientific lens. And that doesn't mean that all of our content is science. We actually cover all content areas in all our schools, just like many schools do. But we do believe that humans and students at an early age really should understand how the scientific process works in terms of making observations, asking good questions, hypothesizing, and creating methodology and collecting data, et cetera, and reaching conclusions. And this idea of truth-seeking is really, really important in the modern world, and especially with the onslaught of media and the world of, I guess I would call it, The Economist had a great description called the world of post-truth politics. This world of post-truth needs to be, I think, we need to think about how science and observation can help us move through that. So students can understand what's true, what's their own truth, what's their own reality, ask good questions, collect the data. So that's part one of the core of our place-based approach. And so everything we do, we think about inquiry. And then once you go through the inquiry process, we think about design. And design learning, I call it the hip and trendy world of design learning because in the United States, at least, it is going like gangbusters all over the place. And places like Stanford's Design School and IDEO in New York City have really started pushing forward this idea that design thinking isn't just for building the next device or building the next house. Design thinking can be applied to all sorts of challenging projects where we can define a challenge and prototype solutions and generate ideas and actually create real working prototypes that we can test out. So in this place-based education model, you go back to this infinite cycle of you go through an inquiry process to look at the world through a scientific lens, and then you go through a design process to then create solutions for the challenges and opportunities that you find. And if we can do this over and over again for students and give them many, many examples in their primary and secondary years, if they end up going on to university and beyond, they'll have hundreds and hundreds of examples of seeing this happen where they actually have a way to make change happen. So when they become adults and they have to be involved in their communities, they're well equipped. At this point, we're well equipping them in terms of perhaps literacy and mathematics, et cetera, but we're not giving them the tools and skills and dispositions to really be invested in their communities and understand how they work. So I imagine the school model, this can happen in many different ways, and I'll talk to you about that in a minute, but the idea that foundations are still important, and we still believe that every student needs a tool belt of communication and being literate and being mathematically astute. We believe in teaching a second language, coding, the idea of coding as an important component of language. And so there are these foundational pieces that are important. But outside of that, is where the applications can happen, the applications of inquiry into design over and over again. So they're building these tools as they go, as they get older, and then they're applying those tools as part of their school day, as part of their school experience into this common core of place, as we've started to use. So let's talk a little bit about scales of implementation, because I suspect that many of you are thinking and saying, yep, I've done some of this, and I think you'll resonate with at least a few of these different levels. And so this is an order of, I think, easy to hard, but you may argue, we can discuss that at the end. So the easiest way to jump into place-based education first is really to create a set of local experts. And these are people, professionals or experts in your community that are willing to come into your classroom, either co-teach with you, present with you, guest speak, anything that gets a real person that is outside of the school community into your community. This is an example from an elementary school in the United States where they've actually built a database of experts, community experts that come in and speak and help support a variety of different parts of the curriculum. So the second level that we think about is this idea of field trips. And I've had many field trips as a student, and I've led some as an adult, and many of them have been honestly not very good. They take a lot of time and energy, oftentimes a lot of money, resources, transportation, and they oftentimes aren't strong in terms of the final product. But field trips are place-based education, and done right and integrated well into the curriculum and articulated well into a coherent scope and sequence, they can be a valuable part of the world of the curriculum. And one of our parts of the Teton Science Schools is we have schools from all over the country and some international schools. They'll come and implement science education right here on our campus as part of their science education back in their home schools. Two different examples I put here. One is the National Park Service students, if they have access to parks, it's great, and they can go and hike in the parks and learn about ecology and science. But the National Park Service in a few locations in the U.S. is starting to think about how do we bring the parks to the people. And so this is in downtown L.A., and it is what they're calling pop-up park rangers or pop-up parks, where they use local parks and small city parks, but have rangers from the adjacent national parks or regional national parks to come in and teach. And these are made available to the public schools in LA. The second one, and I had to put it in here, is this idea of Google Expeditions and virtual reality. So that we're piloting some work with Google Expeditions and thinking about what is the power of students using VR to experience place. I think we're very early in this process right now, and it remains to be seen what the outcomes are, and does it meet the same value add that truly being experienced in place does. The one thing I can say is that if the resources are there to acquire the equipment, it will give access that has never been given before. So it's something that we need to consider in our new technological world. Third thing is this idea of inquiry, and I put this picture up here because it gives you a sense of our world. This is about 100 miles south of us. Wyoming's a big oil and gas producing state, and so our students, which are the students here with some teachers and students all with green hard hats on, are visiting some of the gas fields. And when you think about place-based education, they have a whole curriculum unit on local energy sources. And so they understand that their school buildings are heated by natural gas in many of the places where they live. So they took a trip down to the actual oil fields. They talked to wildlife biologists. They then interacted with the local economy of the town that's nearby that's supported by the oil and gas industry. And at the end of their inquiry, they had to go write an opinion piece on, is the development of oil and gas in this area good or bad, and support your argument. And they all realized that they fell in the middle somewhere. They had to take a stance somewhere, and it was really interesting for them to go through that process. So inquiry is about finding a local topic or a regional topic and delving deeply into it while still covering your curriculum and standards that you need to cover. The next level up, I would say, is this idea of challenge. And this is where you find an authentic challenge in the community. And when I say you, it could be the teachers or it could be the students, but there is some problem worth solving. And every community has a problem worth solving. And so in this particular one, this is from the state of Washington, Hudson's Bay High School, they came up with their challenge was recyclable materials and not able to deal with a lot of the recyclables. And so they created a mushroom farm on top of these recyclables and actually started selling the mushrooms and dealing with the recyclable materials. All of this was integrated back into their curriculum. And I can almost guarantee that they won't remember much of high school, those students, but what they will remember is growing mushrooms on these recycled materials because it was a real project where they had real agency. And the final manifestation of place-based education, which is where we started a little bit, was this idea of, I'm using the word inside-out education. is imagine if schools are just holding grounds, maybe holding grounds for the teachers who are acting as coaches, but around each student is an ecosystem of learning that is their place. And this place has an infinite number of possibilities for students to meet the benchmark standards, competencies that they need to articulate. And so this inside-out model has students doing real work from day one. They're building the tools and competencies, but they're then applying them from early on. They're not waiting for 13 years, for 17 years, or however long before they're out there doing and making a real change in their community. This is a particular school that actually had a traditional business class, and they ultimately ended up building and running a coffee shop that serves the community. And that's their business class. And of course, they learn the tools of financial management and business operation and marketing, but it is real. There's actual customers, and my guess is that they're learning a lot more than if they had mocked it up in class. So those are the 5 scales of implementation, and I'm sure you can find different gradients in there, and this is certainly a gray. It's not a concrete 5-step process, but it gives you a sense of the fact that many teachers, especially great teachers, are doing place-based education in various forms and iterations throughout the world. One other thing to think about in this is this idea of teacher-centered versus learner-centered. And I think if we went back to that first slide about the new paradigms of education, is that we really need to start thinking about how do we give more ownership to learners. If we create the outcomes that we expect in terms of knowledge, skills, and dispositions, how can we create opportunities for them to design their learning experiences, for them to go find challenges to take on? This doesn't happen overnight. This doesn't happen immediately as if they entered into kinder in the United States and they suddenly are able to tackle community challenges. But let's give them many opportunities so that over time, by the time they're in secondary school, they really own their own learning. And it's a learner-centered environment where they are making an impact on place to inquiry and design in a way that they own and they develop their own agency. That's how we're going to develop the citizens of the future. A couple resources to think about. These are 4 of many, but worth mentioning. Most of you, or some of you, have probably heard for Design for Change, and Design for Change began in India and now it's spread all across the world. Has hundreds and hundreds of videos of students making a difference in their community using design thinking. If you are ever feeling that there's no way you could do it in your school, please go watch a few videos and you'll be inspired. So that's one idea. Mark Prensky is a futurist. He paints a picture of a world, and he just came out with this book, Education to Better Their World, where the entire education system is about accomplishment-based education, is students completing real work that makes the world better. And so it's worthy of a read to see sort of an aspirational goal for perhaps the next couple centuries of education. Play Schools is our project that we're doing here at Teton Science Schools, and we're trying to create a network, a replicable model for place-based education using both technology and then ground-up education from the on-site work. And this idea of Play Schools, that we have a network of schools that are deeply embedding the curriculum into their communities to make education better and to make those communities better. And so rather than a top-down approach, we're trying to create a framework for people to replicate across the country and the world. And then finally, I'd encourage you, if you're doing great things, think about going onto Twitter, if you're a social media person, or online and Google this, is the hashtag place-based ed. We're running a campaign. We are partnering through some funding through Carnegie Corporation and GettingSmart, partnering with this place-based education campaign to really share as many ideas as possible of people that are doing this around the country and around the world. So if you have a great idea or you're doing something interesting, please join us. We're looking for guest bloggers as well. So what can you do now? So here's your assignment if you were the class. First thing is, and this is the most imperative, is if you don't know your place, if you're living somewhere and you don't know anything about the ecology of the area, you don't know anything about the social constructs, the politics, the equities, the inequities, you don't know what drives the economy of your place, find that out. To be an effective place-based educator, you need to understand your own place. Second thing is really thinking that you can develop partnerships and develop those lists of partnerships not only alone but with your school, and start creating a database that says, here are the people that are willing to play with our school. Here are the people that are willing to share their knowledge, willing to share challenges that they're having so that your students or the school students can take them on. And so develop those partnerships. Third piece is really think about ownership. You need to help students develop a sense that they actually have some responsibility in their education. And we need to set up challenges for them to do that. This switch from a teacher or a teacher-centered model to a learner-centered model, where they're actually making change happen through this place-based education model, is a really challenging one for students who've been so used to being delivered information for a long, long time. So you have to take that in small bites. The fourth is be aware and cognizant of the challenges in your own local community or regional communities. Obviously, the national challenges and global challenges are out there, but it's really hard to think about how students can end global hunger. But it is actually really tangible to say, what is the level of hunger in our community? That question is tangible. Students can own it and then make the transition, the leap to say, oh, how does that relate to global hunger issues? So identify the challenges in your community. Clearly, you need to be cognizant of standards. If you work in the public sector in any country, there are things that you must do. What we would argue when we work with schools and districts is that everything can be flip-flopped to be place-based. So it's either a tool to help support place-based education, or the curriculum itself can be transformed to be more place-based. The sixth piece, which is always important, is make sure you celebrate small successes. This doesn't happen overnight. The transformation doesn't happen overnight. But the more we celebrate within our own communities, the more we share through social media and share through blogs and share great ideas with the leadership in our schools and our states and our regions, the more those people who are making decisions will see that it is possible for students not just to be obedient, passive recipients of information, but to be truly engaged and active citizens who develop agency from an early part of their educational experience. And I think that is my sort of aspirational goal for all of us in education. This is my 23rd year as an educator, and I've gone through all different models, and I'm realizing now that the concept of place, the concept of focusing students on learning that makes a difference, can actually achieve all the different goals that we have for what I call next-gen learning of the 21st century. So envision this, a common core for place, taking on the common core for the United States in literacy and mathematics. Let's create a common core for place that addresses global challenges. And this, in fact, is place-based education. So with that, I'll leave you with, here's my Twitter handle and the science schools where I work. My email is mate.mcclennen@tetonscience.org, and the hashtag is place-based-ed. I would love to answer any questions. I am not talented enough to read the feed at the same time as I'm actually speaking. So if there's anything, Lucy, that came up that would be helpful for me to answer, I'd be happy to do that.
I don't think anything specific came up, but if anybody has a question, can you repeat it in the chat and I can look at it? I just actually started, opened up a new computer so that I could get on here decently. My connection on my old computer was not working very well. We're so glad to have you here, and this just, everything that you said jives with other themes that we've heard throughout the conference. For instance, I'm thinking about a presentation earlier today by Mark Nichols, who does challenge-based learning through Digital Promise. It totally jives with all of this. And then last night we heard from Tosca Kaloran, who is has a maker space at her international school in Thailand that works on local challenges. And so I think that this is just jives really well with the kind of themes that we're trying to advocate for here. The other thing I'm thinking of too, and he's keynoted for us before, is I wish my friend Don Buckley was here, who is a design thinking educator in New York City, and he's done things, thinking back to your community and local, where he has paired some sort of local expert with a school in order to rethink something. So for instance, when he was at the School of Columbia, they worked with a design firm in New York City to redesign the ideal locker, chair, and desk. And the kids went through the whole design thinking process and researched things and interviewed people. And it wasn't quite focused on the SDG kinds of things, but it was a start to getting the kids into that process of owning it and seeing through that process. So I'm thinking, so my question for you, given this context, and you said that you've worked abroad with some schools, what do you see internationally going on with this? Is place-based education more of a trend in the U.S., or are you seeing some great examples abroad in other countries? I think we'd love to hear about that if you have any
examples.
A
great question. I saw that come through in the chat too, is that I think that it, and maybe it might be presumptuous to say, but it may be similar to the reform movement in urban inner city schools, where folks are saying, no, they need absolutely just the basics, and you can't deviate from that because that's what that cohort of individual students needs. And I might put that in a similar situation to a developing country where they say, well, we got to focus on these pieces first, whether it's core literacy or something along those lines. And I would argue what I think is we're finding in urban education in the United States is that actually every student can benefit from a sort of a transformative vision of education, is that you're not giving up on these core skills and core tools. I think that every student needs that. But every student also deserves the right to have agency in their learning and create an agency-based experience. Every student deserves to have ownership. And so when we do work in Bhutan, for example, and Bhutan has inherited a very, very traditional system from the public system of India, which really was just transformed and put into Bhutan, is that Bhutan is realizing that that traditional model, while it helped create an education system very quickly because the public education system hasn't been around for a long time there, it is not related to their place. And Bhutan has the idea of gross national happiness, which shows up nowhere in their education system when they inherited it from India, but they're slowly transforming and saying, how do we take what we do and make it more relevant to our students? How do we connect it to the agriculture and the hydropower that they use so frequently there as their main energy source? How do we connect it to gross national happiness? And so some of the work we're doing there is helping them realize that they know a lot, the teachers know a lot, and they just need to be given the ability and the tools and the frameworks to actually just flip what they're teaching, so they still cover the same material, but make it more relevant. To get students outside, even if it's just out on the school grounds, or walking down to the local creek or river because it's close by, to investigate, say, water quality in this particular case. So I guess I would say is that it applies to all different countries in the world. The other great thing about place-based education, I guess I would say, is two different things. Is that one is that it doesn't cost a lot of money. It's not, you're not putting in a fab lab, which can be really, really expensive, or 3D printers, or all those kind of things that may be prohibitive across the world. What you're saying is approach education differently. And the second thing that I think is important is that it is not a curriculum that's designed and then given for someone else to implement. It is a context and approach to think about. So it comes from the ground up, and there may be frameworks, but it's coming from the ground up so that the local community and the local schools own it. So I see it as a huge transfer, hugely able to be transferred across different urban and rural settings in the United States, but also across countries, whether developing or not developing.
You and I talked a little bit last summer, and we talked about rural schools. And given the political scenario in the U.S. right now and the importance that rural communities had in what's going on potentially, I think it's still a little fuzzy. What do rural schools need, do you think, too, out of curiosity? Because I'm sure you'd probably see a lot in Wyoming. How are they different? Why should they be doing this? How can those kinds of schools be supported better in general?
Yeah, that's a great question. Now, I can only speak to the United States in this particular case, but from the U.S. perspective, is about 25% of kids or students are enrolled in rural schools. Much of the education innovation space has been focused on urban areas for all sorts of good reasons. There's incredible need, incredible challenges in those areas, and those students deserve great things. There's also, from an education innovation space, there is also a high density of schools and students to try things and to work with new models. So the one thing we see in a couple different things in the rural areas is, one is that funding often is a challenge. It's hard to get grants. It's hard to get, and their per pupil expenditures is fairly low if you have a student level of 100 to 200 students. Second thing is that access to innovation and the access to networks and support services, say from regional universities and things like that. They just don't have access to that idea, those resources. And third thing is the philanthropic dollars tend to not focus on rural areas, and that's not a universal statement, but they tend to be a little bit more, the philanthropic dollars tend to be in high density areas where there's high need in a lot of kids in one area. And then I think the biggest picture, the 50,000-foot view, is that I think that rural areas are starting to realize they need to reinvent themselves. There are many, if we look at schools and education over the last 50 or so years, the consolidation of schools and school districts has been massive in the United States. And so when a school goes in a community, the community soon follows. And so how can the education systems of these rural schools, instead of delivering the exact same thing that every other place in the United States delivers, how can they be responsive to their place to give students, empower students to not only make change happen while they're students, but also want to come back and make a difference in those places? Because we have there's an exodus problem as well as students leave for more urban areas. So I think there's a lot of challenges, but I also think there's a lot of opportunities because small rural communities are very powerful in terms of connections, in terms of believing in schools and supporting schools, in terms of knowing everybody. So I think all those things point to both the challenge and the hope that we see with rural schools, at least in the U.S.
And I think, you know, that's where technology comes in too, is that you can stay wherever you are in the world and still be connected and still learn from other people and benefit from maybe some things that happen in more highly dense, you know, areas. So, you know, I think that's part of what we try to do here with this conference is we want to give, you know, I go to conferences all the time. I meet a lot of people in person, but not everybody in the world has that opportunity. And so I think that's one of our kind of unsaid, inarticulated beliefs here is that we're opening up doors to people who wouldn't necessarily have access, whether they're in the U.S. or outside of the U.S. So I think that's really important. Another question, Amy Yurko, who's a friend of mine who's actually done some work in Wyoming, she's an architect, a school architect, and she wanted to see, what slide, Amy, do you want to see?
Can I go, that one?
This one? Gosh, you got it. Okay, great. Yeah, I thought everything you said was spot on, Nate, here. And this is what you said is a really concrete guide to innovating wherever you are. So I really appreciate this in general. Can you, why don't you take a few minutes to plug Teton Science Schools in terms of online and in-person kinds of programs that you have for people. Before you get into that, the reason I asked Nate to keynote is he comes from one of the most beautiful parts of the United States, the Teton Valley, sometimes known as Jackson Hole or Jackson, Wyoming. And I was fortunate enough as a kid to go to camp there for 4 summers. My mom went to camp out there for a while, and now my kids have been going to camp out there. And so I guess it must have been May or June, I saw an article in the GettingSmart blog about what Teton Science Schools were doing and Nate's role in it. And I thought it was fascinating. I put it in the chat earlier, and I'll put it there again when we're done talking. But if you ever get the chance to get out to this part of the world, consider yourself very lucky. And I think my, the influence of space on a kid is really important. And because of my experiences there, I think it's made me, I thought about this a lot this summer when I was giving a keynote to teachers in Maine. It's made me an adventurous educator. And I think that's what brings us all together in these global education conference rooms, is that we believe in doing education better and the power of being together and using technology to make that happen. And I wouldn't have an adventurous mindset if I hadn't spent time in this very, very special place. So Nate, we're so happy to have you here. Tell us more about what you guys are up to programmatically at the Teton Science Schools.
Yeah, you bet. And I would leave, before I do that, I'll leave you with one interesting quote, is that, and I don't even know who to attribute it to, but this idea that, yes, we live in a beautiful place, but the quote is, every place is special or no place is special. And I think when you go back to that triangle of the structures of communities, is that in my experience, as I've gone and developed and grown my own sense of what I think about education, is that I now drive through towns and visit towns, both local or nationally or internationally, and I look at them in a completely different light, no matter what they look like, because every place has context, every place is special, and every place can be a location for building a strong curriculum. So the science schools, we're a 50-year-old nonprofit. We are really unique in the United States, is that we live in the intersection of formal education, classroom education, informal education, and then professional development. So we run 2 schools, a pre-K through 6th school and a pre-K through 12th grade school that are just schools that students attend from the region, one over in Idaho, one here in Wyoming. We have a graduate program that's in place-based education that is a year-long residency up here in the up here in Jackson, and then they finish at University of Wyoming and other universities. And then we have a professional development branch as well that does teacher training. So we'll go out and work with districts and teachers, and we'll bring teachers and districts here, or we'll go out and visit with them and start a relationship where we help them transform their curriculum in their place or relative to their place. And then we have a whole programming arm around bringing students here to really look at the inquiry process, the scientific process, and do real science in a real place where they're out collecting data and spending a few days here in Jackson, Wyoming, which of course, as Lucy said, is a beautiful place. And so we live at the intersection of those 3 places, and it's all about how do we use the place as a context for learning. What my world is thinking of how do we, not everyone can come to Jackson, and my world is thinking about how do we take this model that we've developed over 50 years, 5 decades, and transform it into something that schools from across the country and the world can use at relatively low cost, something that's doable within school budgets, but gives a framework for schools growing their own curriculum. And so that's going to manifest itself in a couple different ways. One is a network of new schools potentially. I'm calling them micro schools because I think they're going to be small, where there's a technology solution that we're working on that will help provide expertise and model curriculum, allow teachers to build their own curriculum, but within the guardrails of a place-based approach. The second would be the conversion of a current school where a grade or a classroom or a middle school, for example, might say, we want to become part of this Place Schools network. And you would be joining a larger network of schools that would be sharing curriculum and sharing ideas of how do you really deeply embed this idea of inquiry and design into our programs. The third component is the idea of a truly online delivered education for homeschool students or students that need an online solution that is not just sit in front of the computer all day. It is actually the curriculum is delivered through the internet, obviously, but then the assignments are going out and asking students to do real things in real places. So it might be go and interview a politician. It might be do a map of the habitat in your backyard or in your city block. It might be grow a garden. It doesn't matter what it is, but we're starting to build a set of curricula around place-based but delivered online. So we're calling that Place Schools Online. And then the fourth piece is around professional development, is that trying to develop a set of professional development courses that we could deliver anywhere in the world, that we working with our adjunct faculty here to help people develop expertise in what does it mean to understand your own place? What does it mean to build connections? How can you be helped guided into delivering and taking students or helping students go outside the classroom? We found that many teachers find that difficult, is that they're not trained around that, or that we don't develop that capacity when they go through ed school or classes. And so our goal is to develop our own set of courses around that would be available to folks from around the country and world. So those are the 4 things that I'm working on that are blending technology, but allowing this any place, any pace, any time kind of connected to place experience for both students and adults alike. So that in a nutshell is who we are and where we're going, and happy to entertain any visitors if anyone's ever out here. Be happy to show people around, or if you're interested in us coming your way, let us know and you can just send me an email.
That's fabulous. If we want to go back to your contact slide, that might be a good time to put that up again. Yep. I highly recommend. I follow you guys like on Instagram and things like that, and it's always inspirational to see, people out in the field doing things. So make sure that you find Teton Science School on social media too, people, because there's great stuff. the other thing I wanted to mention to you too is something that we've been dabbling with during this conference, and it's not quite blending the virtual with the physical, but it's a way to make things a little bit more interactive. And I thought of you guys when I played with it the first time. It's a gamification platform called Chrome Warrior. They're out of Seattle. And at the California EdTech conference, Q conference recently, they set up different challenges for the people at the conference to do, and then they won badges and things like that. And so we set it up for this conference so that people would kind of delve into certain areas of the conference. We wanted people to go to a keynote presentation. We wanted people to look at, an archived session. We wanted people to help another person in the conference, things like that. So we have it. It's on the front page of our website. It's called GEC Connect, and you might want to take a look at it. It was interesting. The woman who has been helping me with this, a Chrome Warrior, said that the founders are from northern Minnesota and Canada, and they actually have set this gamification platform up to for snowmobilers, to teach people like snowmobile safety and things like that. So I thought of you, and and just kind of trying to. I knew that you were thinking about doing some of the PD virtually and that sort of thing around place-based education, and you might enjoy it. So I just thought I'd throw it out there. Does anybody else have any final questions before we let Nate go and everybody goes on to the next set of sessions? Oh, Crystal, you want to go to which slide? I'll give you the mic. If you can tell me which slide you want, I'll just give you guys the mic privileges. There are a lot of great slides. You guys can also save the slides too. If you go to File and Save and Whiteboard, you can save this as a PDF. You go to the File menu at the top of the window, then Save, then Whiteboard, and then PDF. Crystal, I think you're talking about the Sustainable Development Goals one.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah, and there's some great resources. Yeah, this is available online as well. So
if you're interested in the SDGs too, they have what's it called? The World's Largest Lesson website has a lot of stuff on this. And then Digital Promise and their challenge-based learning is gearing people towards this as well. So I'm saying that more for the audience's sake than yours, Nate. But
right.
I think there's a lot of momentum going around the SDGs.
I think so, and
right
it's, we're relating basically what we're doing with the Play Schools concept, which is what we're calling it, is relating all curricular units to these so that people see the connection between local and global. Because I do think that they're big picture ideas, but we have to connect it locally if students are going to have any comprehension of what they are and what they could do. Otherwise, it feels hopeless.
Yeah, especially now, right? Yeah, I mean, I think we're all about people taking this information in these rooms and taking action, whether it's in their classroom or somewhere else. And I think that's kind of the theme that we've heard with these goals, too. If you have any other questions, please follow up. And Nate's a member of our community. You can always reach him through there as well. And we'd love to have you guys connect outside of the conference virtual rooms. So thanks for coming, everyone. Once we leave, the session we'll process and we'll upload it to YouTube and that sort of thing. So thanks again, everyone, and we'll see you at the next set of sessions. I'm going to stop recording right now.